Now you're based in New York?
I'm based in Jerusalem.
Oh, you are?
I live
Okay.
for the last 27 years,
Oh, cool.
and I come to New York occasionally.
Are you going to other cities?
No. I'm just here now. Actually, I came in because my mother passed away in April. We put up a tombstone this week, and so my sister and I went out there, and that was the reason for this visit. And he said, well, as long as you're going, and because he's gotten this grant to interview second generations,
Right.
I have a couple of names. I said, fine, whatever you set up is fine. So that's what I was trying to set
Cool.
two people up today, but the other guy, something came up, we had to transfer, and that's why I was talking about the lining up the moon and the stars, and he fell out. So we're only doing you today, and that's fine. And whenever I come back to New York, which is once a year, sometimes twice, I'll do whatever he finds.
Right.
And people coming in Israel. So the guy said to me, who we were going to do today, the other guy, that he'll be in Israel next year, so we'll do it there. That's fine. Most of the interviews are Hebrew, obviously, and I do most of the English interviews. And I've been a journalist my whole career, and I now work with the Jerusalem Post, and that's my real job.
Ellie, would you mind if I run into the back? We got the screen's great.
Yeah,
Up on the
screen's
computer.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, I'm gonna shut off the sleep on that computer. So
Oh.
it doesn't happen anymore.
Oh, right.
Oh, it sleeps?
Right, good catch.
Oh, well, you'll know better how to do that than I do. But let me see. Like I said, I have an assistant who
What time
knows
do
all this
you guys
stuff.
get here?
About 9:45.
Good.
And it's small setup. It's quick and easy. And Jonathan's he's a very good host. He's very friendly and
Yep.
yeah, it was no problem.
Yeah.
Story next year and
Right.
setting up.
I put never.
He knows.
He knows about right.
Yeah,
Right.
just about as
Right.
much like
It must be
Yeah.
asleep.
This is
Yeah, these pictures are crazy.
These what?
These pictures.
I know. Yeah.
Very talented guy.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Oh, okay. Never.
Where in Israel do you live?
Jerusalem.
My girlfriend's Israeli.
Oh,
Yeah,
how's it going? How's it working out?
it's good. We'll be in Israel probably in 19, but if not for sure in 2020.
Visit or moving?
And
This-
I do not know the name of the kid.
She's in theater and I'm.
Uh-huh.
And she can't.
Or-
can't
or
be
even
in New
wherever
York
we were.
or, like
Mm.
maybe LA,
That
but
was
probably not even. Maybe London, but New York.
Nice. Where do you live?
You want me on an
On the
angle?
west side,
Where?
84th and Broadway.
Ah, I was thinking
Where do I look
107.
best?
I think
Not,
you were.
not that far.
I think you were fine where you were.
Although I'd like to live a little farther north, but where we are, it turned out really well.
You tell me when.
When?
Okay, it is October 30th, 2018. We are here in the Bronx on Decatur Avenue interviewing Jonathan Atkins about his father, who was a integral part of the entire development of Israel. What I learned, it was interesting to me, that the whole issue of exporting food, and specifically meat, to Israel during that period of time, allowed by the United States, and your father was sending food, among other things, but one of the things he started, because he had worked at the Department of Agriculture for 10 years. What did you know about that? Tell me about that.
I'm sorry. 1 second. I just want to make a quick adjustment just so you guys have some.
Just
We're good to go. There we go. Thanks.
And that would be Atkin, Atkin, no S. If I sounded like I said Atkins, it would have been the possessive of his apartment.
it's
So
Russian.
it's what?
It's Russian.
Russian. Where'd he come from?
South of Kiev, his father. But it could have been. It was a name that was essentially transliterated from. Could have been Etkin. I mean, there are Itkins, the Cyrillic of the sound of A-E. They could have spelled it A-E-A-I-T-K. I mean, you see all those kinds of variations that the fine folks at Ellis Island decided to just write whatever they wanted.
Yes. But your father was born here.
Oh, yeah. He was actually born in Hobart, New York. His mother was born on Rivington Street in New York. And she married a Russian national, and while we are discussing regularly the issues and the horrific nature of our immigration policies and rules, then my grandmother, who was born right on Rivington Street, was forced by American law to give up her American citizenship, and she had to become a naturalized American due to the laws of this fine country.
Huh. Which she did.
Yes, we have the papers.
Yes. So your father's involvement as a young man, he must have started around 20 at the Department of Agriculture. And I read in his book, he knew somebody who got him the job, and he brought that expertise and knowledge to work for Israel, starting with the embassy in the making in Washington.
Correct.
Before the state was established, actually. Tell me what you know about that.
Well, he was the, going back a little bit from there, he was very much influenced. He met Chaim Weizmann. He met a number of Zionists early on and was
Caught up in the movement.
definitely, we would say today he swallowed the Kool-Aid. But ultimately, I have books that I have from his papers signed by Chaim Weizmann. I have his autobiography. I have books signed by various. I have a Ben Gurion book that Ben Gurion signed. So yes, he was caught up with it. Matter of fact, that bust of Chaim Weizmann is on my table. But his expertise in agriculture certainly was significant, and he worked with the very important law, Public Law 480, which was the law that was developed to ship American food surpluses. And it was a price support system developed for, we had abundant resources and abundant grain surpluses, and farmers were not getting the money they wanted. And so the government developed, and I believe the law was developed by Hubert Humphrey. And I haven't substantiated what my father's involvement in that, but I have been told previously by others he is the father of Public Law 480. That said, he certainly knew all the nuances, and in his book he certainly speaks to how he was able to get Hadassah involved unprecedentedly in terms of being the organization to distribute American foodstuffs, and they had to change some of the protocols or the charter or create a new Hadassah agency that fulfilled in terms of accountability and all kinds of other federal requirements of the law in order to be a recipient of the federal grants of food.
This was after World War II, so this was because, I'm wondering why there was such a surplus, because returning servicemen and then the economy itself in general was growing and booming at that point, right after the war, and therefore there was so much extra food and the farmers weren't getting the right price.
I'm not erudite enough to know about what the economics of the American food system was, but there were surpluses, and it was a way to support the prices for the farmers. That's essentially what PL 480 did.
And then ship it overseas.
Right,
and
and Israel is not obviously the only recipient.
Right.
There's volumes of data and treatises of all the different countries, from Jamaica to Bulgaria, of who received American food surplus. And there are analyses of how much of that was effective in various countries.
I would imagine Israel, which was pretty poor and had very little of anything in bulk, it must have been incredibly
Well,
important.
certainly post independence, during and I may be pronouncing this wrong, the Sena period, the
Period, right.
the scarcity period, it was critical to get foodstuffs to Israel. But at that point, I believe the process had already been locked up. But the Sena period was in the early 50s. Then my father came on the scene essentially full bore. Obviously was at the embassy or what was to be the embassy prior to 48. And he was the administrator for the embassy, the executive, I think his title was executive director, and ultimately when the ambassador, the first ambassador to the United States, came on board, my father's position, I think, was agricultural attaché, and I had not heard that directly from him until I was in Chicago with my brother, and at a break the fast dinner with friends of his, and the agricultural attaché of the Israeli consulate in Chicago said, "Well, I'm fulfilling, your father's role in certain aspects."
When he talked about this, do you remember him saying, "You won't believe this, I was feeding Israel"?
I don't know that he would ever say that. I don't recall him saying something like that.
But your sense as a son, hearing about your father's exploits going back to then, and we'll get to further, was that your father was...
He was certainly arranging his expertise was in the distribution of material and foodstuffs.
Okay.
And so, should I?
Should we turn it off? Should we answer?
Yeah.
Well, you're plugged in. You're wireless.
He can get up.
But you can't get up.
He can't get up.
Say again?
You can get up.
Okay.
He's not moving much, so it's not like.
So I'm going to shut this off.
Putting this on him will help fill those spots in case it does get bad and you need to bite. So we're kind of
I am unplugging the phone,
juggling.
Okay.
there.
so we won't hear it.
I'm not hearing anything, but...
Oh no, I do because the
yes,
mic's on this jack.
Okay.
is it because of the jacket itself? No.
Yeah, it's because the mic.
By the way, I have my father's book here. If I
Yeah,
need,
you know what? You can hold it up, and they could...
Let's take a look at it. See if we can adjust it.
Let me just adjust your
just hold it up 1 second. We'll just hold it up to the camera. I was going to do this later.
okay. Do I need to modulate my voice? I can bring it deeper.
hold on. But I'm gonna like put it here so it's not up against the jacket. It's a little better. I can't really put it on his shirt or else we'll see the entire wire.
Right. Although,
Unless I can go on the other side.
what we do is we run it up the shirt.
Yeah.
All you see at the top is the clip.
I could do that too.
We're okay with that.
It's really just about if we hear it or not. Like either way, works for me.
What did you hear of the wrestling now?
I
just like adjust.
I don't hear it now, but he's also
He's standing. Right.
Are we
How
rolling?
do you feel, John?
How do I feel? Fine.
Yeah, comfortable in that.
How's your health?
How's what?
How's your health?
My health today is fine.
I answer that question similarly when people ask me. The older we get, it's amazing. We thought we'd be immune. It's the other guys is going to get...
Yeah,
God, old age sucks.
I continually think that I'm 24 years old.
Right, me too.
And I'm not.
Right,
And I have injured myself because
thinking that, right.
You want to
Yeah.
swap these?
Same. It's incredible to understand how much getting old sucks.
Well, I mean, I have been a licensed captain in the port for
Right.
15 years.
Right.
I did not renew the license this year because I can't.
I'm gonna go the opposite.
I broke this arm 2 years ago, and to put and the rotator cuff is screaming at me. I just can't be on a deck or pulling a.
We have to be right. The strength of the arm, right.
Yeah. So I just said, all right, screw it.
You can
I've gotten my
yeah, I'm just
publicity
gonna
out of it.
Huh. Yeah. How old are you, by the way?
69.
put this in your phone.
Yeah.
And that should be a little better.
Okay. Testing 1, 2. You hear me?
I hear you loud.
Yep.
I had my bar mitzvah in Passover, which I have never had anything but a Pesach cake.
Wait, what was that opposed to?
My bar mitzvah was in Passover, so I've never had anything but a Pesach cake. From
I'm gonna take this opportunity to remove the car.
Yep,
I'll
yep.
text Gage when I'm coming back up just so I don't interrupt anything.
Yeah.
you can leave the door unlocked. It's locked. One of the latches is locked. They go opposite directions.
You only get three choices with Deluxe.
Right. There you go. Oh, we're gonna have to let him in though.
Right. No, yeah, right. He didn't get what you're saying. You meant to lock it before you close it.
No, I was saying he could to get back in, but we still have to let him in anyway, so it doesn't matter. Nobody's gonna
All right.
bother us.
Now I forgot where we were.
Well, in his book,
Oh yes, you're gonna hold up the book. You want to shoot that?
Oh, yeah.
Just hold it like this in front of your chest, straight up. No, straight like the back. Right. Hold on. Your fingers. Right. Straight up. That's it. Okay, son.
Could you go a little higher with it?
tattered copy.
I mean, it's really astounding. In the little I've read, to see how much there is. That we're just going to touch on whatever.
I've read it 2 times, and I keep finding nuggets that I didn't know.
I'm sure.
And there's stuff that I've heard about for years.
Right.
And there's some stuff that's probably not accurate,
Right. I saw that in your email.
and it's hyperbole.
Yes, well, you write that in the email.
Right.
I was,
And well, we all my siblings, we all have discussed some of that.
uh-huh.
Give me one of these.
Vanna
next to
White?
your face and you're looking at it. Yeah. Nice. And what camera? Okay, great. Yeah, you
Okay.
can put that up now. Thank you.
1 second, we on?
Yeah, we're going.
So,
Navigating the federal regulations of getting
well,
food
he
overseas.
had early experience, as you had said, with as an agricultural economist with the United States Department of Agriculture, and he was involved directly with the food surplus program within the USDA. And it's my assumption that he worked with, or my knowledge that he worked with Senator Hubert Humphrey to develop that program, because I have heard that he was referred to by some circles as the father of Public Law 480. That he may have advised Senator Humphrey makes sense given Minnesota and being a wheat state, etc. So, even in his book, he speaks adamantly or massively about the terrific needs that Israel had for food during the Sena period. And he did not meet, I don't believe, I think there was a very special meeting in 1950 for him to develop how Hadassah and other organizations could create a coalition to qualify for the federal surplus program, which he eventually engineered. And it was a major coup to pull it off, because the regulations of Public Law 480 were very strict and specific, as is most federal regulations are. But they were able to do it, and they were able to change certain agency profiles in Hadassah and otherwise to be a recipient. That later, according to, and this is not any more than what you can see here, created some problems of accountability, and at one point there was a huge, almost scandal that certain foodstuffs were being sold off privately in Israel, and which unfortunately happens in a lot of food aid programs.
Sure.
But Israel being a test case in a sense, and it just set up all kinds of alarm bells. But that was another problem. Fast forward just for a second, because the PL 480 program was something close to me, is at age 19, I sailed as an ordinary seaman on a Zim ship, reflagged as an American bottom, as they called it, to fulfill the PL 480 requirements that a certain percentage of ships bringing foodstuffs to a recipient country had to be American ships. In other words, the Public Law 480 also not only supported farmers, it supported the American maritime industry. Whether or not there were many American ships available, but ships were reflagged, and this particular Zim ship was reflagged under a separate corporation called Transport Commercial. Very difficult to find references of that. But it was a one-ship company. And the ship was Tamara Gilden. She was originally built as the Engedi, and she was one of the many programs or recipient of the war reparations from Germany, which created infrastructure and railroads and ports. And from what I understand, not from my father, but my own research, that the War Reparations Act in Germany essentially was critical to Israel's building up in the early 50s. So the ship that I sailed on was built in Germany and represented, according to the captain who told me, 20,000 lives by the formula of which reparations were created. And there was a sister ship as well. And we carried about 15 or 20,000 tons of grade number 2 wheat, where we would pick it up from Galveston, Texas, and take it across the Atlantic, and evidently was profitable enough where the ship came back empty and then refilled its cargo holds for more wheat. From what I understand, the ship also went to other ports that were recipients, but I only sailed to Haifa. And the most interesting part of it is that this ship and the captain were very good friends of my father's. He was on the board of Transport Commercial. Even though on the ship, my story to the crew was that my father owned a drugstore. Because I had to work with 30-some members of a crew that was primarily from Louisiana and Texas, American seamen who were not necessarily open to a college student who had connections.
Yep. Right.
Yeah, it was just that little bit right
Oh. Okay. Let me sound. Okay. Back.
So
up. Yes.
the only point here was that my brother sailed the ship 4 years ahead of me.
Uh-huh.
So it was a tradition for my brother and me to sail on the ship.
But it must have been nachas from your father. His kids are going on the same. I mean, right?
and hair pulling for my mother, because she was worried. I mean, in those days, not as much today, but shipping and the possibility of injury and being hurt on a ship was second to mining. Not because the injuries would be great, but because you did not have access to any medical treatment. Right. And it would be weeks before you could perhaps get to shore. My mother allowed it only because this particular captain's wife was a registered nurse and she was on the ship.
Amazing.
The captain was Captain Myers, not a Jew, but had devoted his expertise to helping Palestine and the immigration shipping, running the blockade from the British blockade of getting refugees to Israel, and he felt that was a cause that he wanted to support as a maritime captain, which he did. And he was a very good friend of my father, but he also was awarded this brand new state-of-the-art ship as a prize and as a thank you to...
By the Israeli Navy?
No, by Zim.
By Zim.
No, it had nothing to do with the military. But he was given that master's position on a brand new ship that, unlike a lot of cargo ships, every crew member had their own air-conditioned cabin. You know, who knew? But the
father was involved in arranging, facilitating, helping bring the refugees through the British blockade?
I don't believe so. I don't have that knowledge. He may have been an advisor or I have photographs of him which are totally unexplained in his book or otherwise on the bridge and the decks of ships, and that he and that it was this is I think before this is way after the blockade, but he was involved in procuring ships for Israel to serve in one way or another. I'm not sure. He denied to me that he was involved in the President Madison, which became the Exodus. I don't know. But I have pictures of him in a full suit and tie, which is, and we grew up in the Chesapeake Bay, and he's a boater and a sailor. And unless it was really business, he would not be in a suit and tie and a fedora and his pipe on the bridge of a ship. So it's my fairly substantiated thought that he was checking out different ships that were for sale and helping procure them for needs of this fledgling country. One ship was a ferry boat from Eastern Shore to Annapolis that existed before the Chesapeake Bay Bridge was built. And then once the bridge was built, those boats were up for sale. And he was on the bridge of one of those boats, presumably that he was checking it out to see whether it was an appropriate vessel for Israel's needs. I have researched that particular vessel that he was on never did get bought by any Israeli agency, because there's records of then who did buy it after the Bay Bridge was built. But there were other ships as well that he was involved with.
Did he back up a little? Did he tell you stories of November 29th, 1947, the UN vote, the partition vote,
Not that I recall.
and May 14th, 1948?
There is a story that he sort of proudly discusses.
Can you put that down?
Prior to May 14th, there were a number of people who were recipients of money that were funneled in cash to a number of individuals who stored that money in their personal bank accounts that would be accessible. And also, he talks about the story, and we know this is true, that the IRS came to our home, and this is before I was born, or before I was conscious, and said, "This doesn't look like a millionaire's home, a multimillionaire's home," which at that point I think he was still on a low agricultural economist salary level at the United States Department of Agriculture, which was not a millionaire's capability. So the IRS, in those days, this was before the internet, this was before it was when gentlemen's agreements worked. And my father simply said, "No, I'm not a millionaire. You can put me in jail if any of that money is still in my account after May 14th, 1948. He was one of many people who were receiving funds for that were then distributed
For the state within
For the
whatever
state.
capacity. And these funds were coming from,
individuals all around the country.
and why was it being siphoned into your father's account?
Well, he was one of many that received. I mean, he was not the only one.
And
that's
how it was working in the embassy to be. We're getting money. It's coming in. We got to put it somewhere. We're going to start putting it over your accounts until we need it.
Yeah, I don't know that it was specifically earmarked. For either the embassy or for
The Jewish agency.
the Jewish agency, lovingly referred to as the Joint, and to where it was actually eventually distributed. It was my impression that it was Haganah related, But I don't have any paperwork that suggests that, but from just listening, and that would have been the agency at least that could pull underground operations together.
Your guesstimate on how much was in his account?
Well, at least he talked about the IRS saying this doesn't look like the home of a millionaire. So I'm assuming certainly at least $1 million, but I have no clue. I don't have bank records, and it may have been fluid. I don't know, but it was enough for the IRS to flag. But he made a gentleman's agreement, and May 14th, obviously the Independence Day was already set at that point. The IRS did not visit again. But
he told you of the celebration that went on that day. Where was he that day?
I don't know.
Okay.
I would assume he would be at the now embassy. And my birth certificate says I was born in 49, so he was working in the real live embassy. And in most birth certificates in those days, it said father's occupation. And my birth certificate does not say his occupation. It just says Embassy of Israel, which is very telling because he was wearing lots of hats, both official and covert.
Correct.
And so...
both American hats and Israeli hats.
Yes. I mean, he was a registered foreign agent and has been for decades. But his involvement with the embassy was extensive. His involvement with other Jewish agencies, common discussion at the dinner table included Hadassah and Pioneer Women and Histadrut and the Joint and all of the organizations that were American funneling services, people, food, material, and
Transportation.
well, he was very much skilled at surveying surplus, and much of it for medical purposes. And there was a great deal of, while we've concentrated sometimes on his role in foodstuffs, he made trips to different federal depositories or repositories or storage banks of thousands of dental equipment, chairs and radiology and stuff that evidently certain parts of the government had deemed surplus because they've either upgraded their dental equipment either on ships or government VA hospitals or wherever that kind of stuff would come from. But he went to examine this stuff and presumably evidently shipped that type of stuff. He would look at trailers, containers, because refugees needed places to live. So there was a lot of government surplus that he was able to discover or find or get into the pipeline. One of his colleagues who I knew, who was involved directly as my father was because I had talked with him and I knew him when I was in graduate school in Rochester, was Irving Norrie. And Irving Norrie owned a company called Ajax Electric. And he was shipping electric motors for whatever needs. I mean, Israel had nothing. So he was shipping electric motors, but evidently they were illegal to ship to Israel at that point. And he was jailed for shipping electric motors. How long, I don't know, or whether it was just sort of and his son and daughter-in-law are passed, so I can't substantiate any of that anymore. But I knew him, and I knew that was certainly part of that. And but he was, I had a long discussion with my father, and there were bits and pieces. And because I was a graduate student in Rochester, and he said, if you ever need anything, go to Irv Norrie. And he made it clear that Irv Norrie was in some way directly related with the American efforts through the Haganah. And there was this network of activist, Zionist, young Americans with the idealism of a new Jewish state.
Many of them who served as the in the army, the foreign contingent that served in the
Yes.
Israeli army.
The one story I don't know if it's in his book that my father was proud of is that way past all that period, I think more in the 70s, Ben Gurion asked him, why don't you make Aliyah to Israel? And my father said, Mr. Prime Minister, I'm much more effective for you in Washington. And he was.
When you said before the many hats he wore and his actions and his duties and some of them being clandestine, can we say for a fact that your father was in some of the hats that he was wearing, in some of his capacities, was in fact working against the law, undercover, working?
I don't know that he was working against the law.
Meaning he was shipping something illegal. He was moving something illegal. He was facilitating something illegal.
I don't know that. I know that, like Irv Norrie definitely was.
And your father knew. Your father knew what Irv was doing. So he at least, okay, so we can say he certainly had knowledge of what was going on.
And he may
but
even
everybody
helped Irv do the shipping.
He may
I don't
have.
know.
Okay.
Because he was the material distribution guru.
Right.
I mean, that's what he did. That's what he knew how to, as an economist and as someone who understood ships and shipping.
And American law on ship and shipping, then he knew what he can do, get away with clean, and what he would need to finagle.
Again, I don't know how much was finagled. I think he generally tried to, even later years, he worked with regularly the AID and Department of State and the Department of Commerce. He was always sending his assistants to the Department of Commerce, and because he expedited things, he helped reflag vessels. I have a hand-typed letter from Is Branson. I'm forgetting his first name, but it's in my papers about him, where Is Branson, who ran a shipping line, thanking my father for help in introducing the port of Haifa to his ship line and reflagging a vessel, but the letter doesn't say how that his vessels were reflagged or what vessel but my assumption was it was reflagged in order to take advantage of Public Law 480. And here's a hand-typed letter from old man Is Branson, who's like a well-known name in early American shipping.
How long was your father at the embassy?
He was there as the minister director of the pre-embassy, or what they called the mission, up and through 48, and I have to look at the exact date, but our family became stricken with polio in 49. And at that time, because polio was completely not understood as a communicable virus, possibly, he was fired from the Israeli embassy, or dismissed or let go. But
They were fearful.
yes. And I don't know how damaging that was to his
Psyche.
psyche. But it was a significant event in his life. He maintained, but then, post that, he then had met Bob Nathan, Robert R. Nathan, who was at that time sort of the kitchen cabinet, in the kitchen cabinet of Roosevelt, and also a Zionist, and introduced my father to a number of, and this is prior to his firing. I mean, he'd gotten to know Nathan and others, and had been introduced to different Zionist leaders through Robert Nathan. And it was just a perfectly good fit for him to then be asked by Bob Nathan to become the second officer of Robert Nathan Associates, consulting economists, which...
One quick note, please. So you're slowly turning more left.
Oh,
Is that
I'm sorry.
Okay for you still?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Want to shift the chair?
Yeah, if we could do that, and also.
Should I move it this way or this way?
Yeah, we'll turn it.
No,
sorry,
the other way.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
I just...
when you go and lean left.
Okay.
And you put more weight on that one side.
Right.
You're hearing it squeak a little bit.
Oh, I see. Okay.
As opposed to the weight distributed.
Got it.
So if you could just watch that up, and of course, keep it.
As we say in shipping,
I'll interrupt.
as we say in shipping,
I'll interrupt if it comes up as well.
as we say in shipping, noted and well received.
Yeah.
That's what every email I have from every ship port agent, that's how they speak.
Really?
Noted and well
Does that
received.
just mean don't bother me anymore?
No, it means
It actually.
it's
I
essentially
understand.
it's essentially a very crisp, without taking any more time, 10-4, that
Right.
acknowledged. But those are the words they use.
Noted, obviously.
Nobody want to see?
I'm learning a hell of a lot today. So, in the answer to your question of whether the being let go because of the polio issue, whether it was damaging to his psyche, the answer is no, because he continued his devotion to the state of Israel.
Well, I think there was damage. He soldiered through the damage, but I can't imagine that being let go from an employer that he had devoted his entire being and personal passion. I can't imagine that wasn't. And I have to refer to the book to see if there's a chapter there that speaks to that, and maybe I can do that a little later.
Did he meet other leaders at the time, Abihelo Silver and Stephen Wise and the Zionist leaders? Do you know of that?
He has a number of people that he discusses in his autobiography. Those names don't ring a bell for me. He had lifelong friendships with a number of Israeli politicians, bankers, who actually one of them is still alive. His son, Gerson Kadar, was involved with Bank Leumi in the early days. Gerson became a family friend, and his wife Yael visited us in our home in suburban D.C. His son Giora was the general that during the Six-Day War broke through Nablus on the West Bank because he had been stationed there and knew it, and it's a labyrinthine town, and he understood it and knew where the weak points were or how to negotiate that Kasbah, essentially, and was instrumental in taking that town during the Six-Day War. And Giora he met me on my first trip to Israel on Zim's ship. And we traveled all over Israel. And one of the issues, again, of coming to Israel as a disguised seaman whose father had a drugstore, was that on arrival, information was sent out to various Israeli authorities that Maury Atkins' son was arriving in Haifa. And they sent police boats to come and take me off the ship ahead of time before the ship even got into the port.
Talk about protect you, as they say. Talk about
Well, but
you're embarrassed.
my cover was blown,
Oh yes,
because I still had to go back across the Atlantic with
Correct.
the same sailors.
correct.
Sorry, no sirens.
And how did you maneuver that embarrassing moment for the trip back?
Well, I did, first of all, I refused to go on a police boat. I did not want to be treated differently than the
Right.
rest of the crew. So I said thanks, but no thanks. Though I was able to do things that, the crew mostly had to stay on the ship. And because of my father's contacts, I was able to hire an Israeli seaman to take my place for 4 days while the ship was unloading so I could tour around Israel. And I paid him my American wage, which is more than he would have gotten. And I understand he was really a sluggard and lazy. And, at that point, the jig was up. A few American sailors can have the wherewithal or the resources to hire an Israeli seaman to take your place serving chicken soup in the officer's mess. But on the trip over,
Yes.
the first mate of the ship had gotten wind or figured out that somehow I was connected to what a lot of the crew members called this funny contract or funny ship, because we would find in the steward's department, and occasionally, all your crew members are given towels. I mean, it's a hotel. And some of the towels said Zim. So the crew members said, okay, what's with this ship? And the chief mate figured out something about me, and his nephew was on board, who was a shirker, and he said, could you please take on a responsibility or make sure my nephew gets the job done? And I said, well, he said, or I will, he threatened me essentially saying, I will let the crew know that there's something very strange about your relationship with this ship. So I called the captain. I said, Captain Myers, could I come to the bridge? It was about midnight. He said, yeah, come on up. And I told him what the chief mate had said. He said, I'll take care of him. And the next morning, the chief mate said, you're good. I understand. So the next night, I took creamed herring up to the captain on the bridge, which I was in charge of, being in the steward department. And I said, Captain, so what did you say to the chief mate? He said, very simple. If you speak about Jonathan and any relationship to the ship beyond the fact that he's doing amazing good work and doing a lot of overtime, you'll never sail on this ship again.
That'll do it.
Yeah. So, we also carried on that ship, when my brother took the ship,
Yes.
they carried
Your brother Joe.
Brother Joe. Mm-hmm. They carried on the deck, I believe, F-4 Phantoms, destined for Israel. On our ship, we carried in nice plastic anti-salt protection missiles. I think they were, I don't know what kind they were, because I was 19, I wasn't, but they were long things with fins. So the ship obviously was used for other goods beyond just wheat.
What do you know of your father's direct involvement after he left the embassy and joined this?
Well, once he was hired by Robert Nathan Associates and a partner,
Right.
and he became a partner with
Right.
Robert Nathan. He remained involved thoroughly with multiple Israeli agencies and organizations.
Including
Probably
the-
more so than what he could do at the embassy, because now he was a consultant
Correct.
to Israeli agencies, multiple agencies on multiple programs.
Including the military?
The answer is yes, I have log books, if I may.
Yes.
From my father was an avid recreational boatman, yachtsman, and these are log books that he kept from his two of his favorite vessels.
Yeah. Could you bring them up again?
Separate. Yeah.
Does that work?
Yeah, could you look at them? Back account.
In which he writes.
These were logs that guests on his boats would sign in.
Right.
And there is a number of entries by Israeli military officers signed in Hebrew. And one of them, I've had some of them translated, and one of them, it was the head of Israeli Navy forces in the
This
IDF.
would be 19.
I could look at the books, or we
Yes.
could look later,
But
but
it's just the date of the.
if I could find the actual, this may take a moment, but
I'm gonna have Scott post them.
Yep.
well, there was. This is in the 70s.
Okay.
I mean, throughout the books, there are people signing in Hebrew.
Okay, we're gonna.
That's
Yep.
Gage. And I mean, he certainly entertained lots and lots of Israelis on the boat. Does the name Moshe Mirav mean anything?
How do you spell that?
Meirav.
Moshe Mirav. Vaguely.
With a daughter Tamar Mirav, Ehud Mirav, and Amos Eizan, Eizan.
There are some Mirav.
1971.
Okay.
But there were definitely but I have substantiated that several of the signatures are definitely Israeli military officers.
It's really based-
Reuben Avital,
Mm-hmm.
Eli Geva, Audi Yinon. I mean, it's a continual drumbeat of people. Here's one totally in Hebrew. I have no idea what it says. On the right page.
How it was so great to be here.
Okay, generic.
Yeah, and then I can't really read his name. Really, Talber. Wow.
But I know that certainly several of them were Navy.
Right, Navy people. Right.
Yeah, no question. And that translated into what? Are we rolling?
We are.
Okay, that translated into on my last trip to Israel with my father, where he was able to get access, and we would travel to see a clandestine IDF Air Force
Operation.
operation where I wasn't allowed to photograph anything.
I would think.
and the aircraft were all in berms and huts, protected from visibility otherwise. And I asked one of the pilots, and I think they were I don't remember which aircraft, but in the 80s, could they have been Phantoms or something else? I don't remember. It certainly wasn't the newer stuff today. Maybe could have been F-16s by then. I don't know.
80s, I don't think so. Phantom, I think.
Right. And so I asked one of the pilots, I said, how do you like our aircraft? He said, the aircraft are great. I said, well, how about the navigation system? He says, oh, we rip all that out.
Correct.
And we use our own.
Correct.
Right.
That's known, yes.
Yeah, that was, but to hear it said by a pilot, saying, we answer to a higher authority.
In effect, yes.
Indeed. So,
So this indicates to me is, your father was under the radar. He wasn't famous, quote unquote.
no,
But he obviously was doing a damn good enough job that Israeli naval commanders would feel comfortable and familiar with him and his operations, to be on his boat, to hang with him, to correspond with him. He was a player that no one knows about.
he would say to me, those that know, and those that don't need to. He was old school. And even though we know that he spent quite a bit of time inflating some of his importance. I mean, after all,
But justified.
yeah, if you're working and engineering and choreographing those who are getting the credit, I guess you want to at
little bit
least
of your
say,
own. Correct.
hey,
Correct. Right.
I'm, and again, those that knew and trusted him and knew that he actually wouldn't try to brandish or self-aggrandize himself, and those that knew. But in a limited way. And like I said, some of what he said was to me or to our family, it's hard to know. There are certain things that I continually have gaps about that I cannot get substantiation. I have a picture of him on the SS America, and I don't know whether he was in the cocktail lounge or whatever in the port of New York, or whether, because that ship did sail to Israel, and where he joined it, if he did. But he was definitely not looking vacation. He was in a suit and tie, and the pictures with some other men. And I've only traced some of the information. I know that ship went to Rome first, and my uncle, who was in the U.S. Army, came to see my father when he went to Rome, which was a trip that my mother was not on, because generally, if my father was on a vacation, my mother would certainly be, and she made many trips to Israel with him. And I may be making this up out of broadcloth, but I can't find any records of that trip or how he was. But my uncle told me that he was on a buying trip in Italy, and my uncle came down from his base in Germany to see my father and said that doors were opening to him wherever he went. But he didn't know why.
So my feeling is the question I asked before about his clandestine activities. Your father lived by the famed motto, loose lips sink ships.
Yes.
And he would not be a man to speak. Reveal any kind of detail. But it seems to me, I can't prove it, I don't think you can either, but it seems to me, in fact, that your father was a major underground player, getting all kinds of things done, because you can't have entree into all those things the rest of your life unless you've put in the time and the goods.
And are trusted.
And are trusted.
Yeah. If I may fast forward, because it's really just snippets. When I was, I think in high school or the Six-Day War was what,
June 5th, 67.
67. That makes sense because I graduated from high school in 67. And he asked me to come on his boat. And it has to be prior to that because after 67, I went to college. And unless it was the summer, which it could have been, I'm not sure that I would have been home. In my recollection, and only again through cross-referencing time and date and with other friends who were journalists in Washington, he asked me to come and be the helmsman on his boat. And he said very clearly, there'll be one person on board you know, who happened to be Avraham Harman, the Israeli ambassador to Washington, who I knew well, and I taught his daughter how to sail. So he was comfortable with me being my father's son, but also knew me at the time. There was one other gentleman who to this day, I do not know who he was, but he spoke Arabic. And we went, and my father said, just drive the boat, we're going blues fishing. You're not to be part of the conversation, just drive the boat.
You've proven my point that I just said. You've just proven the point.
And the only thing I can consider was that this was geopolitics at its best, that a deal was made between perhaps the Jordanian ambassador and Avraham Harman to protect the pipeline from Amman to, I guess it went to Ashdod, to ensure that under whatever circumstances it would not be attacked or severed or turned off by Israel if presumably Jordan remained. I mean, they weren't neutral in the Six-Day War.
No.
So I don't know the agreement or the specifics, but the pipeline was not bombed or shut off, as far as I know. But I don't know the specifics of it. And I have asked for decades after that. And the specific question, I said, Dad, what went on this fishing trip? He said, there were no cameras, there was nothing, there was no record of it, but I was there, and these were your instructions. And his comment has always been, even up to his deathbed, was there were no Uzis. And that's how he explained it, that it wasn't a big deal. There were no Uzis on the boat.
Where was the waters you were fishing in?
The Chesapeake Bay.
How
And
long were you out?
well, we went over towards the Choptank River to the eastern shore, so it had to be at least 4 hours. To get out there, back, do some real fishing. Somewhere between 3 and 4 hours, or a whole afternoon. I don't recall. But just in terms of the speed of the boat and the distance and where we were, yeah, I would say certainly a full afternoon.
I'm sure of what I'm saying, and we'll never know the whole story.
No, because I even asked him repeatedly over decades.
Yes.
Because I wanted to know, and
He's
he
the
would
kind of
never.
man who would not even tell his son.
But he often elaborated about other things that were minimal, or certainly.
Because those he could talk about. And he could talk about freely, even if they were less important.
Correct.
Because the important things, he was not going to say a damn word.
I did my junior semester in Italy, in Florence. And for some reason or another, I ended up at either the Israeli embassy or the consul while I was, and it may have been a Hanukkah party because I was there in the winter. And there was that period, that incident where Israel, quote unquote, stole the patrol boats from France, from Marseille, and there was issues of whether they were paid for or not. But
The Boats of Cherbourg, yes.
Yeah.
The book was written about it.
and I've never seen the book,
Abraham, I know the author. He's a journalist in Israel. Yeah.
Okay, so that was, I'm assuming that was in 1970,
Sounds about right.
because that's when I was in Italy. 69, 70.
69, 70. Yeah.
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 My junior year. 70, 71 was my senior year. And at the Israeli embassy, I'm assuming, because my Italian teacher that went with us from college was the daughter of the most respected Jewish rabbi, or the Jewish community. I don't know if he was a rabbi, but he was a macher in the small Rome Jewish community, and it was small indeed. But she introduced me to some people, and somehow or another I ended up at the Israeli embassy, and there was a TV screen showing the Cherbourg boats, and there were media planes and everything following this wink wink theft. I mean, it was clearly, I don't know all the details, but it was a face-saving event, evidently for the French or whatever. And the ambassador looked at me and says, "That's your father's work." He has always denied that. And he said, "No, I had nothing to do with it." And he may be right. Maybe the ambassador was wrong. But if he wasn't, what he was saying, which was more telling, was it has the earmarks of what your father can do.
Awesome.
So it doesn't matter whether he was involved in Cherbourg or not.
Right.
It says, yes, here's the ambassador to Israel in Rome, ambassador from Israel to Rome, saying that has the earmarks of your father. And that underscores his fact that he did do clandestine work. Whether the Cherbourg thing was or wasn't, in the scheme of things, it's not important.
Correct. Either it was his kind of work or it was his direct work. In either case, that was he lived in that world.
It put the imprimatur
Yes.
in my mind that he was involved in stuff.
100%.
Now, again, fast forward or not fast forward, during the first Operation Moses in '84, which I was completely unaware of as a child, though given what transpired, and I was a working photojournalist at that time, I was really hurt. He didn't invite me to photograph this amazing operation of Ethiopian Jews being herded onto C-130 planes and building fires on the inside of the C-130s. I only knew about it when I read a front page article in the New York Times by A.M. Rosenthal. And there were names throughout this news article on the very front page, the bottom page, but it was still on the front page. And all these names from United Israel Peel, from Hadassah, all these titular names, I knew every one of them. They'd all been at our dinner table from time to time. And I said, none of these people have the capability of pulling this off. They had to have, and the center core of those names was clearly, in my mind, all roads lead to my father. So I called my mother, and only the first time I've ever heard her use language that would embarrass a seafarer, said, "That goddamn Rosenthal is killing Jews," with his article, because it pulled the curtains back on this operation. And she was livid. I don't know where my father was, but as I recall, in my memory serves, he was sort of running the puppet strings on the operation from Zurich. And what he has told me later was the whole operation was a need to know, obviously, that he had cooperation from Henry Kissinger, who they were friends. They often actually were confused by people who didn't know either one. He would be asked, because my father had wiry hair, just like Kissinger, didn't speak like him, but until he opened his mouth, he knew. But he would be mistaken for Henry Kissinger, and Henry Kissinger occasionally, people who didn't quite know who he was would ask whether he was Maury Atkin.
Wow.
So they got to know each other.
Yes.
And Kissinger evidently, gave their approval for what the operation was. But if it went south, you're on your own.
Correct.
At the same time, the Soviet Union at that time, Sudan was a client state, and so my father's office at Robert Nath Associates was literally catty corner from the Russian embassy, and on 16th Street in Washington, D.C.
One second, we have a problem in the airplane.
We should take this time to change your battery.
We could do that.
About like 7 minutes onto the battery.
We are in Bravo airspace.
Yeah, you want to change batteries? That's okay.
Yeah, don't worry, take 1 second. Let's do 1 second.
We're back.
We're back.
The rescue or exodus of black Jews from Ethiopia
Yes.
was, to the best of my knowledge, one of his last capers. And it was a need to know. And so, given my father, unlike current politicians, and for those who may be seeing this decades from now, there was no collusion. There was basic Washington diplomacy where ambassadors and ministers and attaches knew each other, because that's what Washington does. But it wasn't for self-aggrandizement. It was the needs of the various countries and what their needs were. So given that Sudan was a client state of the Soviet Union, and my father had a relationship with, I'm assuming, the ambassador at that time, or and I don't know whether it was Kosygin.
We've had a few, but these two were actually showing up.
It's funny, I totally forget that in New York it happens all the time where a plane over Jerusalem is pretty rare. It's restricted airspace. When you
Sure.
So it's like, oh wow, planes overhead, which happens, once every 2 months. But here it's New York City. You get 3 airports. You're running.
Do not go to Norfolk and do a taping. Because the big naval air base is there, as well as
Yes.
there are 3 different air bases, and they are flying F-35s at screamingly low levels every 10 minutes, right down through downtown Norfolk, and in formation.
Yes.
So you would never tape anything.
Okay, so Sudan, client state.
So Sudan was the client state of the Soviet Union, and so therefore the black Jews were marched, or the Ethiopian Jews were marched out of Ethiopia through the desert, and white unmarked Israeli C-130s were waiting for them in the desert, where they loaded on and flew to Israel. And this went on. I don't know how long the operation was, but obviously it was many days. And it was obviously the Mossad that brought the folks out of Ethiopia and marched them into the Sudan. In terms of the clandestine work that my father did, and from what I understand, he was a key player in that whole operation. Certainly because all the people in the A.M. Rosenthal article were all people who he dealt with on a daily basis. I couldn't think of anyone. And with my mother's comment or expletive, clearly
She knew what was going on, and
she knew what was going on, and that the article had disastrous consequences, and it was personal because she knew what my father was doing. And
Now I'm tuning myself into to get it ahead of time before you start the sentence.
sorry, I don't have double pane windows.
That's okay. That's all right. It's really okay. Go ahead.
Okay. So clearly he was involved in it, and the Soviet Union, whoever the foreign minister was that my father dealt with, or who was the ambassador at that time, again, from what he said to me, if the thing went south, it would be total denial. Fortunately, it didn't, and I didn't get invited to photograph it either. But that said, later years, we would be at dinners for various celebrations or events or whatever in various hotels in Washington, D.C. And he would point out, see, he was on Operation Moses. He would point out waiters in the hotel that he knew or knew that they had been, or just simply guessed because he knew what they should look like being Ethiopian. And this was a new population of people in Washington. And many obviously went to Israel and then somehow made their way to the U.S. Many were in Israel. And to this day, when on my last trip to Israel with my father, he took me and my mother and my father, we went to a resettlement village, which had been brand new built in Israel. And I have a photograph of my father. He was incredibly proud of what he had done for these families.
Facilitating the
Right. I mean, he there were tears in his eyes because clearly this was very special to him.
What year was this?
80s, I'd have to check.
Late 80s.
Yeah. And that was, I had a number of conversations with some of the Ethiopian Jews who were in these camps are great, but their issue was that, and this had nothing to do with my father, but it's such a multi-leveled set of issues where how do you assimilate a new group of people into a country, and they were certainly encouraged, or there were language classes and everything to learn Hebrew, but the complaint I heard from some of the elders was that Israel was not encouraging the teaching in the classrooms of their native languages, which I don't know whether it was from Eritrea or whatever, but there was a great deal of tension, where yes, they'd escaped, but they didn't feel as if there were a lot of issues, as there is in Israel, with where the Ashkenazic population is changing or has changed, where it's no longer a European nation.
100%. Constant changes.
And that's happening in the United States as well.
Yes.
So, and all over the world. But those are issues which I found fascinating, though it had nothing to do with my father's subsequent activities, per se. Again, to reiterate or to emphasize the clarity that I received about my father's clandestine work, was on one of my trips. I was in Jerusalem, the second to last trip. And I was hanging out with the UNIFIL soldiers. And we were driving, and they were from Fiji. And we were driving around Jerusalem in their beautiful white Jeep with the UN on the hood. And they had taught me some Fiji Islander songs. And we were singing them. And it was Friday night, the Sabbath. Carrying on. We were not drunk. We weren't drinking anything. They couldn't do that. But they were venting, and I was having a good time. And we were stopped by the authorities. I'm assuming they were the Jerusalem police, but they may have been a military arm. I don't know. But all I know is that their Jeep had lots of antennas coming out of it. And they collected the Fiji Island, the UNIFIL guys' credentials and my passport. And after what it seemed like a half an hour, probably it was only three minutes, they came back to our Jeep. They said, looked at me, and he says, "Sir, these boys are doing a great job for Israel. They're 15,000 miles away from their homes. They're not Jewish, but they are terrific." He didn't use the word terrific, but he did say a great job. And they need to vent occasionally, and we understand that. But you, Mr. Atkin, we ran your ID, and you come back, Mr. Jonathan Atkin, as Mossad. And we can't touch you. But because obviously you're connected, obviously you're Jewish, you should know better on the Sabbath.
Great story. You came back as Mossad.
That's what they said.
Wow. So now everything I said, I believe.
Because
Your father-
I don't know how that, and it wasn't a mistake in the sense of seeing just Atkin. I didn't see their computer or whatever it is, or
Yep.
or how they.
The database they checked, yes.
Yeah, I don't know. Could have been a mistake. They could have just seen my father's name.
Yes. Yes. That's good enough, though, for me. This is confirming it.
Yeah.
Your father was knee-deep in all the activities that were going on. I'm convinced. I'm convinced.
Yeah. So here's a Jerusalem
Yes.
policeman or IDF
Was confirming the story.
shaking his finger at me, saying,
"Yeah, you should know better." Shabbos.
"Yeah."
Yeah.
But it was very clear. He didn't say it wasn't, he didn't say something or euphemism, or he didn't say, "Well, I see you're connected with this," or he directly said to me, because, I mean, it's emblazoned in my
I bet
memory,
it is.
because it was like, oh. I mean, I had Israeli press credentials,
Right.
and I had to get my hair shaved for, what's it called, Beit in Jerusalem, the Israel press office.
Yes. GPO, yeah.
But it was
It was housed in
Beit something.
the
the house.
downtown. Yes, they moved. Yes.
Right. Well, this is way back.
Right.
And I had an actual IDF card, or no, it was just a press card, but something or other. But in order to be photographed for the card, I had long college hair, and they took me to a barber where I had a glass of Turkish style coffee and shaved all my hair off, except for military cut. And then they said, "We will photograph you." They weren't accepting for whatever high level credentials they were giving me.
Clearly, they had done the background check and you had passed, and they, in other words, that's why they had you in the database. Mossad may have been an accident with your father, or it may have just been handed down. Meaning, because you're your father's son, you're also under that
Umbrella.
Yeah.
And that could be.
Yeah.
But again, it's kind of like the Cherbourg incident. Whether or not I was directly registered as Mossad, the more important thing, as you said, is knee deep. That was a confirmation of some of his clandestine activity.
100%. You had mentioned something in one of your emails about the Mayor Dizengoff, originally the SS City of Atlanta.
Yes.
What was that story about?
I have offered a bottle of very good cognac to anyone who can identify the men that were standing on the bridge of the Mayor Dizengoff with my father.
In
50, I would say 52. I think I sent you the whole, I may be wrong on the exact date, but the Mayor Dizengoff was a former Isthmian line, which was a ship line developed by U.S. Steel. And they had a number of vessels, and they sold them off to Dizengoff Shipping, which was technically Palestine, Israel.
Israel-Palestine Navigation Company.
Correct. And my father, in some way or another, consistent with his having pictures on other ships, clearly either found the ships, engineered the transfer, the brokerage, or the purchase of those ships. Either by Dizengoff or the Palestinian Israeli Navy, or at a certain point, and this is in thinking about it and thinking of the timeline, at one point Zim, which was still fully government owned, Zim was not privately held until only recently. It was still 50% owned by the government of Israel, I think through the 70s, if not after, or 80s. But it was, at that time, fully owned by the government of Israel. And Zim viewed the Dizengoff operation as competition and bought them out. So I don't know whether this photograph I have of my father on the bridge of the Mayor Dizengoff
Reflected some kind of action that was taking place.
well, it reflected one of two things:
Yeah.
the ship being bought by Palestine Israel Navigation Company early, before Zim bought the ship, or when Zim bought the ship, which matches my recollections that my father was more involved with Zim than anything. So he probably helped broker or engineer the deal. And my assumption is the ship was renamed. It was sold by U.S. Steel, and it was probably in New York or perhaps in Baltimore. But if it was in Baltimore and it had been bought by the Dizengoff or Palestine Israel Navigation, I don't know why it would be back in the United States. But so that's hazy. But my thinking is, for whatever reason, the ship was then, they may have kept the same name when it was transferred to Zim. Those ships were old. They were built in 1915, I think, as that was the Atlanta City, and they were really scrap ships.
You had written it was built in 1921.
21, right. I verified that because there is a whole database on ships, and shows who built them, who flagged them, all the data. And so it was built in, I believe, in Alabama, and with, I think, the Chickasaw shipbuilding, whatever. But they were engined, their engines were built and installed here in Kearney, New Jersey, at the Federal Shipbuilding plant that built a lot of World War II ships. When they became owned by whatever Israeli shipping company, they were past their sell-by date. They were really probably bought for a song, pennies on the dollar, because they were really ready for the scrap heap. But they weren't. And obviously they were sound enough to continue a few more years. Wasn't long, but obviously they served a purpose. So my father was on the bridge with these other gentlemen, and I have sent photograph to people around the world, and I haven't got a response, including the PR director of Zim, Shatai, I forget his name now, but so if you can find out who they are, I will give you a copy of the picture. I'll email it to you, and you get a bottle of cognac.
Okay.
But again, it emphasizes his hands-on.
Yes.
He was very hands-on with Israel, and he often characterized his economic practice as juicy economics, as opposed to ivory tower economics, where
he was, as they say, in the field. He was doing it.
he talked about how he would go to a foreign leader and sit on his desk to make a point.
Did you ever ask your mother what your father had been up to? Or was she, as your father, understood that loose ships sink ships, and therefore would never ever answer that question?
It's actually somewhere in between, as most things are. At one time at dinner in our D.C. area home, there was some discussion, and my mother had asked what, she wasn't, and this was in her vital days, I mean, it wasn't during when she got older, but it was when I was in college. She asked, or wasn't clear about really what my father did. She knew he was totally involved with Israel. She knew he was a consultant, but somehow or another, I explained at the dinner table what my father did to my mother. And he was there, and he said, "That's a very good explanation."
And you said?
Don't really recall what words I used, but it was specific to economics and supply and demand and the distribution of material and goods and how all of that integrates into
The building of a state.
It was not Israel-related question. It was just simply, what does my father do as an economic consultant? My father called himself a professional Jew.
Sorry, it's still pretty prominent.
Okay, we'll save that.
Crisscrossing planes?
Could be. Okay.
Start the sentence again.
My father referred to himself as a professional Jew. And he often complained that he spent more time with nonprofit Israeli organizations for less money than any other set of clients. And he had other clients and other governments that he did consulting work, which included Ghana and Sierra Leone and Sri Lanka. Now, I don't know the relationships of Sri Lanka or Sierra Leone, but Ghana was specific because they were receiving a huge amount, and probably the greatest amount of per capita aid from Israel. There was a very symbiotic relationship. And some of the former Zim ships, as I recall, became part of Ghana's ship line, which I believe was Black Star. So there was clearly his advising and consulting to Kwame Nkrumah and others was directly related to his work for the government of Israel. Whether other West African countries, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, were directly related to Israel, I don't know. I suspect not. My mother never went to Nigeria, as far as I know, with my father. She did go, but she did go to Ghana. And they really liked Ghana, and they liked the folk tales and the cowrie shells and the kente cloth. And I was in junior high school when they were doing Ghana, and I'd be wearing kente cloth, not this artificial Taiwan printed stuff, but the real stuff.
Yeah.
But much of that work in Ghana had to do clearly with his association with Israel, because it was related in Israel aid, and I don't know what type of aid Israel provided, but I suspect it was abroad. I don't know whether it was in strictly money.
Still going. It's kind of becoming heavy.
Yeah. I'm not sure it really interferes much. I mean, it's there, but it's not like it's, you can't hear it.
Well, it's just if you cut from something where it's not there to it being there, it would be. Okay, you can play ball.
I don't know what complexities Israel had with my father being, whether he was serving strictly as a developmental officer or a developmental consultant with Ghana, which I suspect that was pretty much what he did everywhere. The tie-in with Israel may have been just the introduction. I don't know. At one point, speaking of introductions, I was home from college, and the phone rang, and I answered it. And the other end of the line simply said, "Is this the home of Maurice Atkin?" I said, "Yes. Who would like to speak to him?" This is the office of His Excellency Anwar Sadat. And is Maurice Atkin in? I said, yeah. And I knew enough, being my father's son, and all of us in the family knew that this type of stuff was not a joke. We didn't get smart Alex and say, yeah, right, call back. There was enough of this type of stuff where we knew better. I mean, during the 6-Day War, we would get coded telephone calls.
What kind?
One that I got beat for because I didn't give my father the message in time was something to the effect of a certain number of trees were needed.
Oh my God.
And I took the message and wrote down trees and whatever. And my father came home from an evening out or whatever, and I don't know, I guess the next morning I said, "Oh, by the way, Dad, I got some kind of phone call about trees." And he just nearly hit the roof. I do remember one of his assignments during the 6-Day War was to get the blueprints of the power station at the Aswan Dam, which was built by an American company, and which he did, by hook or by crook. And they were instrumental, those blueprints, to incapacitate the power part, which was essentially Israel saying to Egypt, we can shoot the cigarette out of your mouth. So, as opposed to taking out the Aswan Dam, which to take out the Aswan Dam would have been the equivalent of a nuclear bomb and would have created untold casualties that would be an unacceptable collateral. And Israel certainly didn't want to do that. But at the last resort, if Israel hadn't been victorious or if it felt it was going to be annihilated, I guess that was an option. But I do remember his being tasked to get those blueprints. What role they had, or whether I don't know whether explosives were laid at different sections of that power station to take it out. But whatever it was, those blueprints are important. So that was another event or another thing that was clearly not an economic consulting.
So there's an expression in Israel when you need to go someplace. For example, if you're going from Israel into the Palestinian territories, and you find someone to take you along and facilitate, that guy is called a handler. Your father was a handler before the expression came about. Your father was the ultimate handler. Because he was dealing at this level of moving things along and facilitating X, Y, and Z. My question, among others, knowing what you know about your father, even if you don't know 100% what I just said is true, you know the ballpark of what I just said is true. Do you ever feel, let's say, disappointed that your father is not regarded as a bigger hero than he is because he was so clandestine that no one knows what he did?
In many circles, at least growing up in Washington, he was regarded as Mr. Israel. And so I think he was given his due. And I think that he was well respected for what he was doing. It may not because of clandestine work, but certainly.
No, not only, of course. No.
Right.
So very legitimate and above board and straight and
Yeah.
just facilitating all the different pieces that you need to pull together to make anything happen. And so he was just doing that, and that was all fine and known and above board.
I mean, he made over 90-some trips. I forget what the book said, but 96, 97 trips, or 95, or whatever it was. But an inordinate amount to Israel from Washington, D.C.
95, 97 trips.
I mean, the book
I
says
got
it.
Wow.
But
I was going to ask
certainly
that question, actually.
in the 90 number, the number was, unless I'm wrong, but it's irrelevant whether it was 87 or 97.
Right.
But regular, he was back and forth constantly.
And in the early days by ship only.
No,
Always
the
plane?
first trip he went to Israel, far as I know, was in '52.
And he was already flying.
He took a Pan Am Clipper,
Yep.
and he was considered, and I think he and my mother went as guests of the government of Israel. And he was feted not only on the airplane, and he was allowed to go up into the cockpit and fly the Pan Am Clipper.
Unbelievable.
Because he was a VIP, and his passport and all of his, he was brought to Israel as in a major way. It wasn't just Maury, get on the plane, we need to talk to you. No, this was his first trip, and evidently it was very, very, very significant. So in that respect, and in his life in Washington, he was always known for his work with Israel, the government of Israel. As a child, he was tasked to send holiday greetings to various senators, congressmen, functionaries in Department of Commerce, et cetera, and I always had to go to, I think I had my driver's license then, or maybe not, but we went to the embassy and got cases and cases of Israeli wine, and then my job was to package up no more than 3 bottles because we couldn't exceed the $25 limit of gifts to federal employees.
Right.
And so 3 bottles in each bag, nice holiday wrapping. I don't even remember whether it was Hanukkah wrapping. I doubt it, because most of the people were not Jewish that were getting these. These are government officials, and he was essentially he was playing the role as lobbyist. And it was a tradition that I did almost and I got paid for it, but
In his official capacity as?
I'm assuming that it was for the joint, or because the joint, is United Israel Appeal, or some agency. Though I do think that it said from the government of Israel. It didn't say. We had little tags and things, and it was definitely with the seal of the government of Israel. So I think it was part of. He represented Israel, so I don't think there was any fudging as to who was sending these bottles of wine. I think it was in his. Even though he no longer was an employee of the embassy, the Israel government continued to be his client.
Correct.
So I would take these bottles around and take them to people's homes in the evening, whatever. And some people would refuse it at all, would totally, whether it was under $25 or not. They just said, no, we just don't. And some said, thank you very much. Who wants to refuse 3 bottles of, I won't say good, bad, or indifferent. I have no idea what it tasted like at that time.
I can see that you obviously were influenced by your father for your love of maritime and all things connected. Where did your father's love and interest of the sea come from?
He used to say he always had a boat since he was a teenager. It didn't. I don't believe it came from his father or his mother. He just liked to be around the water. He grew up in Washington and in Hobart, New York, which is landlocked. But he just developed a love for fishing. He was, he was either Israel or fishing.
He taught you to tie a fly?
No, that would be freshwater. No, this was saltwater, bloodworms and whatever. But I love the water. I love driving the boat. I love being on the water. I love the seamanship involved with it. But fishing was it wasn't a major.
Did you cook and eat, or did you throw it back?
In those days, we definitely cooked it. Definitely. Throw it back if it was undersized, but we absolutely cooked it. And I love to cook fish. I love fish, and I'm a wannabe chef. And I would go on trips with him on friends' sailboats, and he would always bring a fishing pole, even though that's for boating, on a beautiful fiberglass, super squeaky clean sailboat, to be hauling a bluefish up on the rail. and I would cook them. This would be like in October, just this time of year, where the winds are steady and it's delicious and perfect sailing weather, and we'd go fishing, and then I would be in charge of cooking the fish on a hibachi over the side of the sailboat, and these are like 40-foot sailboats, and I found a half gallon of Cutty Sark Scotch, and I said, ooh, in the bilge, and I'm always inventive, and I soaked the bluefish in the Scotch and grilled it because it's fatty and could withstand it. So, and that was and my father was a good cook, and he liked Israeli food. He always talked about, even before I went to Israel, the Israeli breakfasts. And my twin sister, who just came back, as you know, from Israel from a Hadassah trip, she just raved at the Israeli breakfast that she and her partner had last week. So Israel has always been a theme constantly through our growing up with in every way. I mean, intensely.
Did your father talk of what it was that it meant? Meaning, along the lines of, son, you know what we're doing? We're building a country.
No. I think that was assumed.
Assumed.
Or given. I've never heard him talk in that kind of idealistic, flowing words, almost to the point where I would hear him complain about the Israeli clients, that they were like, herding cats. The difficulties with the Hasidim. I remember we had to run to the port of Baltimore because an Israeli ship was in, and the Hasidim were picketing the ship, American Hasidim, because the ships have to. In those days, ships were $5,000. I mean, the ship that I sailed on, the captain, I told him once, I'm giving a tangent, but I said, there's a sailboat in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. She looks like she's floundering. He says, well, he doesn't have any wind. I said, well, why don't we stop and see if he needs some food? He says, Jonathan, this ship is $5,000 a day. We are not going off course unless we hear a mayday. I brought that up at a meeting the other day in a marine shipping conference. And I quickly went on my computer and saw that $5,000 a day in 2018 money would have been $40,000 a day, which is how ships are what are called fixed. So the cost of that ship in 1970 was really not off base. That said, he never talked about, and I went divergent now.
About preaching the Zionist ethos.
Yeah.
Or
so in the port of Baltimore, he got called because the Hasis were demonstrating, and they wouldn't let the ship unload because it was the Sabbath.
Right.
So we drove to Baltimore, and my father talked with I don't know if it was Lubavitchers or which, but it doesn't matter. They were getting in the way of international commerce and costing the ship. Mm-hmm. And so my father said, if I promise you that none of the stevedores
are Jewish,
were Jewish or are Jewish, will you let the ship load? Well, yes. Well, there are no Jewish stevedores in Baltimore. Generally, well, it's irrelevant what they were because I couldn't tell you. I would assume that in those years, probably very much Italian or Irish. But no question, there were no Jews. So they let them load. But, again, there was this, and this was an interesting moment in my perception about being Jewish in some ways, is that when we went to the docks, and my father asked where was, and I don't remember which ship, it was a Zim ship, obviously, and one of the stevedores on the dock said, oh, the Jew ship. And that's how it was referred to. And that was like not a knife, but it was like, oh, damn. That was a revelation. And in contrast to no Jewish stevedores, on my first trip to Israel, which was on the Zim ship, and I got there and I got off the ship and in the port of Haifa, and I asked my handler, because the consular official for the United States government, who was one of the personal victories my father also talked about, was James Sassover, which anyone in that period would have known. James Sassover was, from what my father said, was the only or the first national of another country that was made an American consulate official. So an Israeli citizen represented the United States as the consular in Haifa. That's major. And he was a family friend. And he was the one that met me and then introduced me to Dr. Reuben Hecht of the Dagon Silo, who had an amazing story to tell on his that trip to Israel on the Tamara Gildan was an eye-opener to some of the infrastructure of the people that my father worked with. Dr. Reuben Hecht, who I spent a whole afternoon with on the Dagon Silo, which clearly Hecht was a client of my father, and he helped him either get contracts, build the silo, I don't know, but Hecht, and I suspect the silo was built part of German war reparations. Hecht himself, like many Israelis, was an avid archaeologist, and he had his own private wheat museum in the silo, which it would rival any serious museum. It's worth seeing, but you just can't publicly walk it, or at least then you could not. Maybe it is on a tour, I don't know. And he had amphora that would come that he was able to get out of Phoenician boats that were doing the Fertile Crescent trade, and then when they opened these amphora, wheat was still viable. So, but Reuben Hecht was a visionary, and it was just a wonderful afternoon to visit him. He took me to the roof of the silo, and he said, you can photograph in this direction, but you can't photograph in that direction because of security of the port or whatever. But he was quite an amazing man. I met, and James Sassover, of course, I knew already because he had been in Washington, and his wife Lenny, and they took me to an orchestra where it was an orchestra of recorders. The whole orchestra were from basso recorders to treble. I mean, normally you just see the little high-pitched recorders, but this was an entire orchestra in an orchestra hall somewhere in Haifa. I met people like, I think his first name was Ben Widra, or Vidra, W-Y-D-R-A, who was involved with Zim. And certainly Gerson Kadar and his son Gior, who I actually stayed with on one of my trips. But there was no lack of people in Haifa or Jerusalem that I couldn't call on. From multiple areas. I mean, one trip, he worked with Hadassah in Washington, which he details greatly. and there were always issues between Hadassah, the national office versus the Washington office, and he did certain programs, particularly with setting up PL 480, that the Washington office was not even aware of. So he had to practice a certain amount of diplomacy, if not clandestine movements of information, to get the national office on board, but not to be interfered with by the Washington office. My recollection of Denise Tourover, who's mentioned in the book, and who was fairly blustery and had a very strong personality. My memory of her was I was in Jerusalem, walking down the street, and all of a sudden I hear in this high-pitched, shrill voice, "Johnny, little Johnny Atkin!" And it was Denise Tourover visiting Jerusalem, recognizing me from across the street from the King David Hotel, shouting out my name. So I couldn't get away from my father's Israel. It was constant.
How many trips have you made to Israel?
3.
Totally nice.
Just 3. The first time was on the Zim ship. The second time was I went from my junior year in college in Italy,
Right.
and flew over. And that was an interesting trip because that was, well, it was not too long after the Six-Day War. And the El Al plane was parked at the Rome airport away from all the other passenger aircraft in a separate area surrounded by military. And we had military jeeps on either wing as we took off. So that was the second trip. The third trip was with my father and my twin sister and my mother. And I think that was the last trip. And that was at the period when the Sinai was being given back, when we actually visited Bethlehem. It was a period when there had been a number of bombings in Israel, and no one was visiting Israel. And the hotels were empty. And the hotels in the West Bank, where we went to a couple of them, they said, "Come back, spend money, $20 a night or less." They had no one. Yet I watched, and one evening I watched workers scrambling over the fences, the walls in Jerusalem between the West Bank and workers who wanted to get to Israel to work. They weren't infiltrating. They weren't. It was a stream of people who needed a job.
Yes. Your father came then because, in fact, no one was coming?
No, we went on a special United Israel Appeal or Hadassah, one of their multiple trips. No, it was just sort of.
When did your father die?
I would say 5 years ago or 6. I'd have to check that
So
if
he
that's
lived a
critical.
long life.
Oh, we were. Well, he was born in 1917. He died 1 month before his 95th birthday.
Oh, wow.
So we were planning a fishing trip for him.
Yes.
So 17 to 94's.
Yeah.
I flunked algebra.
Yeah. Just I'm just thinking. My God, it's so close. I mean, that it was so recent that he died, and then we missed him.
I gave
He was never interviewed for his life. On his life.
well, you work for the Jerusalem Post.
Yes.
Look up the story. I tried to find it before I couldn't get the archive for Alligator Man. There's a story about him as Alligator Man.
Bringing the American alligators to the zoo in Israel, which was illegal to export those alligators.
But what he did was to create an industry of alligator farming in Israel.
Chamat Gader, that's where he sent them to. Chamat Gader.
That's beyond my pay grade.
Yeah,
But
it was in the book. I did see that
Oh, okay.
story. That's it.
But that's what he did, was to set up alligator farming, and he involved a French company, which was another client, because he was working with them with tanning of hides. And and there was no company in the United States that knew how to tan alligator hides or properly. And his clients were the Alligator Commission in Florida, Louisiana, but he set up a program in the United States to tag alligators because they were still officially on the endangered species list. And so he set up through the Fish and Game and Wildlife people, government, a system to tag alligators and have the provenance of their being raised on an alligator farm, from the whole alligator to the skinning alligator to the same tag with every Judith Lieber purse, who was also his client, all the way through the whole process, which then became acceptable. Well, he repeated that, evidently, I think, in Israel. And there is, like I say, I remember the picture of Alligator Man, and he's in sort of his desert hat, looking like one of these guys on TV who does zoo programs. But nonetheless, he prided himself in setting that up in Israel. That was later, much later in his career. Having fun, essentially.
But he can pride himself on anything every decade for the last 6, 7.
I gave one of the eulogies for his funeral at Addis Israel Synagogue, the place to be seen by any politician who wanted the Jewish vote. And the members it was the conservative community synagogue, but the largest in Washington.
Where Lieberman davens. Joe Lieberman.
Yeah, of course. And Ambassador Goldberg when he was at the UN. I mean, and it was just the place.
Right.
And I was bar mitzvahed there. He and my great grandfather helped found the synagogue. And when I was the bar mitzvah, when I had my bar mitzvah, the president of the synagogue was my grandfather, my mother's side. So
Deep involvement.
As the Washington Jewish Historical Society called our family Washington royalty, Washington Jewish royalty. So I gave the eulogy, and coming back to Israel, I've been to a lot of funerals here in New York, and I used to live in Harlem, and I've adopted the Black Baptist cadence of how to deliver a eulogy. And I worked on it for weeks, and my father always celebrated Zim. I mean, Zim was important to him in every way.
In every way, of course.
His favorite ship, and there's in his papers, it's actually on my wall here. It's a photograph shot here in New York of the SS Israel. I mean, what more favorite ship could you have? But the second and it was built by war reparations, named Israel.
Can we take a minute?
Yeah.
Battery change.
Should I get the picture and show it or not?
Sure.
It's on the wall. And I need a stretch.
He'll tell you in a second. So you can do a close-up, pull out, and then
Yeah, I'm just trying to save
is the lighting okay?
Can you tilt it up actually? Yeah. Can you look at it?
Look at it.
That was good. And now up.
Now start the sentence. So this ship,
SS Israel, was my father's favorite Zim ship. it was not the first ship to be built for Israel, but it was certainly his favorite because, duh, SS Israel. His other favorite ship was the SS Shalom. And for my father's eulogy, I coined a phrase because the tagline for the advertising for the Shalom was "Once in a blue sea, a ship like Shalom." And so I used that phrase in my father's eulogy, "Once in a blue sea." And I started out by saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, my father would complain that we're all here and not out fishing." And then I paused. And then I started with "Once in a blue sea, a man named Maury. Once in a blue sea, a ship like Maury Atkin." And I continued that cadence as I discussed it or delivered the whole eulogy. And it was appropriate because he loved the Shalom. And he was heartbroken when
Good.
the ship on Thanksgiving hit the Stolt Dagli off of New Jersey and cut that ship in half with lives lost. And the Shalom got back on its own power and went to dry dock in Norfolk or Newport News. And he got the call, and we went down to see the Shalom and to meet the captain. I don't recall whether it was just fact finding, whether what his role, because I was young, I was 65. I have it in my notes, but I do recall going
64.
64.
Thanksgiving Day, 64.
Right.
Let's hold that thought.
So
Yeah, one second, hold on. Captain Freudenberg.
right,
Um,
who he knew.
and you went down with your family dog, Spotty.
I don't remember whether it was our whole family that went or not.
Right.
Frankly, I don't recall, but
Right.
I'm pretty sure my mother went.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe not my brother, or maybe he was in college. Maybe my sister, I just don't recall. I do know that my mother certainly went, and I went, and dog Spotty.
Mm-hmm.
And
Was it an accident? Pure accident? As opposed to somebody being drunk, as opposed to malfeasance on deck. I don't know.
there was no determination by any right or wrong because it happened outside of territorial waters of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So it didn't come under any jurisdiction of law enforcement or determination. The insurance companies settled, and there was a certain amount of money provided for each life lost with Stolt Dagli. I don't know what that was, and but evidently it was settled in court, out of court. I don't know, but
once again, a situation has occurred, and your father gets
was the
call.
point man.
The point man.
Yes.
Over and over and over again.
Yeah. So we went to see the Shalom, and Captain Freudenberg, I believe, did know my father from having been on other ships. Matter of fact, several of our family vacations were on Zim cargo ships. Not a bad vacation. We went through the entire St. Lawrence Seaway. And we had the owner's cabin, and we were the only passengers. This is way before. There occasionally were other passengers. Real hard. It wasn't today. You can book passages, on lots of cargo ships. It's a revenue stream. But those days it was, It had to be for the real intrepid voyagers because there was never any guarantee anything.
Right.
But we went on, I think it was the ship, the Tapuz, for Orange.
Right.
Went through and Freudenberg may have been the captain on that, but I'm not sure. We also went on another ship, I believe, the Beersheba, from Coatzacoalcos Allende in Mexico, picking up a cargo of horrific sulfur. And the ship, then we crossed the Gulf eventually into Panama City. And that's where we actually loaded our Chevrolet Impala on the ship, the privileges of being connected with Zim, and in a big cargo sling and loaded up on deck. But where it was to be sort of a leisurely kind of fun trip, again, he became a point man, and that the Mexican authorities tried to play the ship. And while it was loaded, said, there's scuba divers have discovered underwater obstruction, and you can't take the ship out. That it might hold the ship, whatever, that there was this unidentified underwater construction or obstruction. And my father, I've never seen him so mad. He was livid. But he sprang into action. We were on this hellhole of a port up the Coatzacoalcos River near Veracruz. Veracruz was obviously the closest place. And somehow he got word and had a case of, as I recall, cognac delivered to whoever authorities were holding up the ship. And all of a sudden, guess what? The obstruction vanished. And we sailed.
Right.
What the captain might have done, or what, if my father had not been on board or had the capability of getting a shipment of cognac to the ship, who knows?
This has been fantastic, really fantastic. Is there anything that I've not asked you about your father that you feel that history should have recorded?
Yeah, tons of things.
Obviously, he wrote a whole book, and we could,
And-
replay the. Actually, I just told a story about 5 minutes ago. I just happened to catch.
I
Yes, you first.
because I interrupted, or the airplanes interrupted. When the phone call came from Anwar Sadat,
Yes.
and that was
Hold it right there. His plane's coming right now. Yeah, right. 1 second. I heard that one coming. Yeah, go.
in his self-biography book. Something happened. Someone didn't do what they were supposed to do, and the chapter about Egypt was never published. And his involvement with going to Egypt as an economic consultant.
You just found that among his papers.
This he printed out later for all of us who got copies of the book, members of the family. This is, and I haven't really read it, but the signature moment was when that call came from Anwar Sadat. And I picked it up, and my father came, and indeed it was Sadat. And he said, Jonathan, this is one call I think you should listen in on. And Sadat, I don't remember the other discussion, but I think Sadat, or I was asked to hang up after a certain few minutes. And plus, it was underwater cable. It wasn't like today where a phone call to Israel or to Egypt doesn't cost anything. And it's clear. But Sadat said to my father, "Do you mind if I call you Maury?" Because that's what everyone who knew my father would call him, Maury, not Maurice. He didn't like hearing Maurice, unless it was a formal moment. But Maury was appropriate. And obviously Sadat had done his homework and knew that my father was called Maury. And my father said, "Sure, no problem." And so Sadat said, well, I don't know what the first phrase or two was, but we want you to come to Cairo. And my father said, "Your Excellency, you know I am a registered foreign agent for the government of Israel." And there was a pause. And then you could hear Sadat laughing all the way across the Mediterranean and the Atlantic without the phone. It was a deep, affectionate, well-knowing laugh. And he said, "Maury, we have been following you since 1952. We know exactly who you are."
I'm glad you remembered that story to tell us, but we got interrupted before by the plane. Wow.
The three people that I witnessed my father crying over their deaths was Sadat, was his closest and best friend, Marva Bernstein, who taught at Hebrew University, was the president of Brandeis University, who was the head of the Woodrow Wilson School, who was an economist, whose wife and my mother had similar interests. Marva played the piano, my mother played the piano. It was a couple who were bonded by Israel for their love of Israel, because Marva had his own condo in Jerusalem for a period of time. And I visited him on one of my trips and stayed with him. And this is one of those rare friendships where all four parties, the two husbands and wives, got along famously because they shared so much. And and what was the anchor? Israel. But not superficially, because Marva was also an economist. And they shared the culture, the food, and living there. So he cried when Marva was killed, and because of my father's involvement in Egypt, and when I went to Egypt, it was on one of the first El Al flights to Cairo, courtesy of my father, and in an unmarked El Al plane. So somehow or another, he encouraged Marva, who was my brother's godfather. My godfather was the first ambassador from Israel. And encouraged him and his wife to finally visit Cairo. And they stayed at the Sheraton Heliopolis, which had a fire, and they perished. Wrecked my father, because he felt, I think, responsible that he...
Courage, certainly.
Yeah, and that tragedy. And the third person that he visibly cried was when the Prime Minister of Israel was assassinated. And he knew him. Rabin had been in Washington, the ambassador. They were friends, but he was not. A lot of people didn't like him. A lot of people did. It doesn't make any difference. There was a bond between Rabin and my father at the highest levels. and a friendship level, on a personal level, and a working level. Because of all the things that we have talked about in this interview. And so those are the 3 times. 2 out of 3, well, 3 out of 3 were connected to Israel.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't want to this, but I got
I'm trying to think.
we got 14 minutes on this packet.
We're fine. We're
Right.
fine. 100%. Oh, my God, the time goes fast. Go ahead. It's wonderful. I had no idea it would be this good because I'm not used to, like I said, I'm not used to doing second generation.
Right.
And the one guy I did was kind of weak because he just told a few things that he knew and that was it. But you really know, and your father's not incidental. Your father is substantively involved in all that was going on for 50 years. So that's something that we don't get on first generation, let alone second. So that's fantastic.
And you asked about whether he got his due. I mean, any time there was a family celebration or there was an anniversary for their wedding or whatever, balloons are always blue and white. Tablecloths were blue and white. So it was a fundamental sensibility in the family. I mean, there were always stories that were so riveting, but even some where he visited Masada once, and he was toured around by, I guess, the director or whatever. And my father found this incredible shard, and he sort of kept it and walked around Masada, and finally he asked the director, says, could I have just found something that's really exquisitely amazing or ancient or whatever he asked him? And the director examined the shard. Said, well, it is amazing. And he took my father over to one of the rental Johnny-on-the-spot toilets and matched the tile to the toilet base.
Yeah.
Said, yeah, it's important. So there are humorous moments,
Yes.
where
Yes.
where he, slap.
Right.
You think-
Right.
And there were plenty of things like that. But his one of his greatest joys was also my father was an avid scuba diver,
Yes.
and he took his regulator and his mask and his fins wherever he went.
Uh-huh.
And he was more upset with the Sinai being given back because he lost his favorite diving spot.
Uh-huh. Yes. Although there are a lot. I've done it and it's amazing.
Right.
Definitely a lot.
And he
I mean, yeah.
he came back with stories about fish with like an orange circle and 2 stripes going, and that he would never see anywhere else. And aside from the discussions at the family dinner table that Sinai was a venting piece of geography for a lot of Israelis to go camping to get out of the intensity of what Israeli life is. And that I thought was probably the larger loss, aside from having a bit of geography for the Israeli Air Force to practice in. But
Where is he buried?
in Washington at the Addis Israel Synagogue
'Cause
Cemetery.
He could have been buried in Israel. He could have been given a royal.
I don't know that. I've never even heard that even brought up as a possibility. He's buried next to his wife. Well, she was buried next to him because he died first.
Yes.
I don't know.
No. I asked the question in part because, just as my role of interviewing people throughout my life as a journalist, it seems to me your father, in history, in the scope of history, has not gotten his full due.
Well, and you bring up the word scope, which reminds me, and it's covered very thoroughly in his book, but his role in building Hadassah Hospital at Mount Scopus. And on my trip, one of my trips with him, he was so proud to walk his children through Hadassah Hospital that he had built. He had gotten the funding from the U.S. government, and he worked very hard at that. And that was, I think, his crowning achievement.
Of all the achievements.
Yeah, I mean, it was a structure.
Yes.
It was helping. He was
It's a
proud,
hospital, obviously. You're
but he
saving
was
lives.
proud of the pool that he showed me that he helped fund that rehabilitated amputees from the various Israeli wars and bombings and everything else. That the bottom of the pool actually hydraulically raised so that it could be 6 inches or 6 feet. At that time, it was like we'd heard all this stuff about, and it was like, oh, Dad, this is so boring. But it was only later that the realization of what an achievement that was. And it was very complex. Now, my twin sister was in Israel 2 weeks ago, and she visited the hospital. And there was no, as far as she could tell, there was, the newer generation of Hadassah people may not know anything about my father. But she was moved to be there. And in his book, he talks about how he and my mother, at the opening of the Hadassah Hospital, were honored guests in the front row of the assembled dignitaries. And the Washington, D.C. representatives of Hadassah were surprised he was in the front row.
Because they had no idea what he would have
They
done.
had no idea.
And once again, a quiet man who goes about the business, takes care of business, not looking for the applause, gets it done, sits in the front row. Because he deserves to sit in the front row.
Yes. Once in a blue sea, a man like Maury.
I'm blown away. I gotta be honest. I'm just blown away by this man's life. Just blown away. When did it dawn on you that my father has done a lot for that country?
When other people had mentioned
Yeah.
who were not him, because again, he boasted, and certain things were not necessarily true. And when my sister was in Israel and met with friends of the family and said, well, there's a little fudging in that book.
But being a man of the sea, he also knew how to tell a fish story.
Well, indeed. But 98 trips were not done.
Yes.
You know,
Oh yes.
And
Oh yes.
you know,
Oh
whatever.
yes.
I
No.
think we want to.
Even if he was a man who would occasionally lapse into bluster over some mission that he accomplished.
Yeah.
But
And he would.
the real missions, which he would never speak about, worth everything because of its importance. This was a man who made it happen.
He does talk about alligators in
Yes.
Israel.
Yes.
and
I'm up to there.
And the VIP guests of the Israeli government, on their first trip.
Yes.
Um,
No, I have not. Like I said, I didn't get enough to be able to go through it in detail. But now I'm more interested to read this book because
and some of it is chronologically wrong. Take it.
that's okay. He's allowed. So there's nothing else. Okay, there's nothing else I did not ask you specifically about him, or not. You've not told about that really is important for history.
Well,
It could be anything at all.
well, the dates, if that's important, of when he left the Israeli embassy due to polio. I mean, I don't know if that's important.
It's in the book.
Yeah.
You said it was like you think it was 49. That's not as important. Something accomplished, something unknown, something that he, or a story like the Sadat on the phone, laughing. We followed you since.
Yeah, that
52.
was a fun moment.
I'll never forget that myself. If you want to know the truth, that's a hell of a story.
Yeah, that was the clip that I said should perhaps end the
Yes. Oh, yes. Well,
maybe Rabin later, but
yeah. No. It's all good. Okay.
um,
Well, yeah. We don't have to. I'm not trying to force anything. I'm not
No.
paid by the hour. But it just if I'm missing something, I don't want to miss something because it's so.
I'm just sort of rerunning
Yes,
the
go.
videotape here if there's some particular thing that stands out. I mean, you know, the number of people that he knew in Israel, which unfortunately are dying off, was very significant. But they were. But I'm thinking of I'm hunting just quickly if there's something that's as pithy as some of the things we've been talking about. Well, he and I would trade. He and I would trade war stories on. You know, I would try to one up him on because I'm always on ships of some sort.
Yes.
And I think he one upped me because I've never been on a submarine. He went in an Israeli submarine.
Okay. There's examples. Did he go to the Knesset?
As a tourist, I think.
As a VIP.
I don't have any recollection of anything like that.
Okay. Or the president's house, or the prime minister's house.
Well, he did when he went to see Ben Gurion.
Right.
And are we rolling now?
Yep. We got 2 minutes.
He went to see him at his home in wherever it was.
Stable care down in the Negev.
Yes, in the Negev. And his wife was away. And he was sick. And he said, you know, if she was here, she would not let me have a visitor. But she's not. And
And I want to see you, so I'm letting you come.
And he saw him in his bathrobe. And that was when I think Ben Gurion asked him to make Aliyah. But that was a seminal moment for my father to have a private moment with the father of Israel. And I have a picture. I think it's in his book too. Unfortunately, it's very faded, but it's signed. It's in my collection. But yeah, I mean, that was not perfunctory.
Yeah. What year was that?
I'd have to look at the
Yes.
picture, or it's maybe in the book.
Jonathan, I thank you so much for all your time and memory. And
I would like to do a cell phone snap of the three of you interviewing me. Is that permitted?
yeah, sure. 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 Huh?
Do you want me to cut it for you? This is Room Toad.